this fantastic world of ants that will be presented by government entomologist Claire JESSEY on behalf of the Bermuda College and BEST. Claire is the Plant Protection Officer and Government Entomologist at the Plant Protection section of the Bermuda Department of Environment and Natural Resources, commonly known as DNR. She obtained her Bachelor of Science in Biology with a minor in Psychology from Dalhousie in Nova Scotia, her Master's in Applied Entomology and Pest Management with distinction at Imperial College in London, and is the past recipient of the Fessenden Trot Garden Club and Commonwealth Scholarships. Claire, you probably know, has given many presentations to various organisations, and we're really pleased to have her with us today. I also know from personal experience that Claire likes nothing more than being presented with a new or unusual insect. It really makes her day. Claire, welcome to today's presentation. Thank you, and let's hear more about this fantastic world of ants.
Good morning, good afternoon, thank you so much. I just want to mention we were having a brief conversation before the presentation about the Bermuda College, and I am a past student of the Bermuda College, and so I'm very happy to give back and be involved in the Bermuda College because it was quite a life-changing event for me, and so I'm very, very happy to be involved again. So I'm going to start my presentation by saying that unfortunately with COVID situation, I'm here not in person. I'm in an empty boardroom, which is a little echoey, I'm afraid, but I'm going to do my best to talk to you through the screen, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. I was asked several months ago to give this talk earlier this year, and although I know ants, I didn't actually start to research them in any great depth until I was asked to do a talk on ants. And I just thought I'd be giving some general ant information. And I have to say that once I had researched the ants, it was absolutely fascinating. And if I decided that if I had to come back and have a second life, I wouldn't necessarily come back as an ant, but I think I'd come back as an ant scientist because they are absolutely fascinating. So I've collected some information about ants. I have to declare up front that I'm not an ant specialist. I'm a generalist. I am an entomologist, so you study a lot of different types of insects. So ants is not, there are ant specialists in the world and they know far more than I do, but I just wanted to try and capture a little bit of my understanding of what's going on in the world of ants, and they are absolutely amazing. So we're going to get started. I have a lot of information. I've got my eye on the clock, and I'm going to try and stuff it all in there, and hopefully there's some time for questions at the end. So this is me. Ironically, I'm wearing the same shirt today. This is, I'm a plant protection officer, as was mentioned, and my background is in entomology, and I do work with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. I've been there for about 20 plus years. So let's get started. So ants are eusocial insects, and they belong to the family Formicidae in the order that contains the wasps and the bees. So the wasps, the bees, and the ants are all related together in this group called Hymenoptera. And the Hymenoptera is a Greek word that's comprised of hymen, which means skin, and then ptera, which is wing. So those are the thin sort of membranous wings that you might be familiar with from the bees. And eusocial, we're going to talk about a little later. The word ant comes from the ant, which is the Middle English Dutch empt, the Old English omet, and all derived from the original meaning, which was the biter. There's about 13,800 species currently recorded, but scientists expect that there's probably more like 22,000 species out there, many of which we haven't even discovered yet. So this is some basic ant biology. So they're an insect, obviously. So they have three body sections: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. They have 6 legs and a pair of antennae. And what makes them unusual from the other insects is they have a very narrow waist. I'm going to see if I can get my little arrow here. So a very narrow waist just in here, if you can see that on the screen, just up here as well. And that makes them part of that Hymenopteran group. And then they have jointed antennae as well. Now, in my job, sometimes people will bring me these insects in to be identified, and one of the ones that gets confused quite a bit is ants and termites, and particularly when the ants are swarming and have the wings. And at that time, people will see something flying. It looks like it might be a termite that's flying. And then similarly, if a termite's lost its wings, somebody might think it's an ant. So anyway, I just wanted to bring this up here. There's some quite easy to notice distinguishing features. So here's the narrow waist on the ant, and the termite does not have these features in here. The jointed antenna of the ant and the non-jointed antenna of the termites. So they're often called, termites are often called white ants because they look very similar to ants, but actually they're more related to cockroaches. But they have also evolved eusocial behavior, which we're going to talk about. So the life cycle of the ant takes about between 8 and 10 weeks, and they start as eggs, and the eggs hatch into larvae, and the larvae hatch into pupae. And then from the pupae, you'll either get a female queen, a female worker, or a male. And if a larvae is destined to be a queen, it will be fed a high protein diet, which is what turns it into the queen. And a worker female will not have that same high protein diet. And the males are actually from unfertilized eggs. So the queens and the workers are the females, and they've been fertilized eggs, and the males are unfertilized eggs. And they only are present for a few weeks of the year at swarming time, which is the seasonal production of males. And those males will have the wings, and they'll leave the nest in search of females to mate with. And interestingly enough, the swarming period is usually just slightly after warm weather with rain. And my understanding of why this is happening is that the queens are going to rip off their wings once they've mated, and they're going to dig in the soil and start their new nest. And obviously, if the ground is hard and dry, it's going to be more difficult for them. So eusocial, I've mentioned a couple of times, and I wanted to just give you the definition of what eusocial is, because it's quite important to understand why the ants are doing what they're doing. So eusocial is an advanced level of social organization in which a single female produces the offspring, and the non-reproductive individuals care for those offspring and the group. So in ants, the colony is acting as if it's a superorganism. It's kind of, there's a lot of different things going on, a lot of different activities going on, but it's operating as if it's a unified entity working together for the collective good. And if you want to think of a parallel, the human body that we have is composed of complex systems that also work together to form a larger organism. And so this is one way you can sort of understand how an ant colony is operating. So within that colony, there's a number of different areas, labor areas, and we call them divisions of labor or caste. So the queen is the reproductive female, and she can live for some decades. And on the right-hand side over here, here's a picture of the queen. It varies from species to species, but generally she's bigger than the rest of the ants. You have the workers, which are the non-reproductive females, and they live between 1 and 3 years. And then we have the reproductive males. Those were the winged males that I talked about. We also call them drones, and they only live for 2 weeks. You can think of them as flying sperm, if you will, because their only job is to go and mate with the queen to start a new colony. And after that, their job is done. They're finished, they're dead, and they're not in the colony for the rest of the year. So within the colony, the newest workers, the youngest workers, start by taking care of the queen and then the next generation of young ants. And then as they get a little older, then they start to do the nest work, which is the cleaning and digging of more chambers, and then foraging and defending the nest. And the reason why the older the ant is, the more likely it's going to be foraging and defending. If you want to think of it as the most critical components of nest care is going to be taking care of the queen, feeding the young. That's critical to the success of the nest. And then older ants are a bit more disposable, if you will. And so foraging and defending requires you to go out, find food. The risk of being killed, squashed, eaten, picked off by a bird, there's a higher risk when you're doing that. So those older ants are a bit more expendable, and so they are the ones that are foraging and defending the nest. So ants have an extraordinary evolutionary success, and there's several reasons for this. And it's basically due to their sophisticated social organization, their accurate communication system, the ability they have to modify their habitats, utilize resources, defend themselves, and to diversify. And this is very key. And research has revealed parallels with our own human societies. We also do have divisions of labor, communication between individuals, messages being sent backwards and forwards, and the ability to solve complex problems. So there are some very interesting parallels in terms of communities and colonies that researchers have drawn between the human society and the ant colonies. So we'll talk about some of the ways that they can modify their environments. And in this case, I wanted to talk about ant nests. And they can form some very elaborate and complex structures to suit their needs. And so over here, I have just a few pictures to show. Let's start with this one. So the ants have taken up residence within a stick, a twig, and they can take advantage of empty spaces in these pieces of wood and move in, put the babies, and be very happy in there. They may just have a simple hole in the ground, or they may have a large mound that reveals that there's a lot of activity going on underneath there. Or in this case, taking leaves and forming them into some sort of a nest that will protect them. And so I wanted to show you a little bit more about that. These are the weaver ants. And these ants will take leaves. You've probably seen them possibly on a National Geographic shows or something like that. They're quite interesting. They will take leaves and knit them together, sew them together. So what they do is, as a group, they hold on to each other's arms and legs when they've located two leaves that they want to pull in close together, and they will pull those leaves in tight. And then what they do is they take the larvae. So this right here is a very young, immature stage of the ant, and they gently squeeze that, and it will is stimulated to produce some silk. And with that silk, they will literally knit the sides of the two leaves together. And as the silk dries, it contracts and pulls the leaves close together. And so they can make some quite nice structures that are sealed. Obviously, this is, relatively weatherproof. If it's going to rain, they're going to be quite protected. They have a little hole down here that they've made for going in. So that's really quite fascinating. Now, scientists were looking at all the different types of nests that are underground. And there was a scientist who discovered that he could pour like a liquid cement or a plaster of Paris into the holes on the top, and it would filter all the way down to the bottom of the nest, and he could take out this clump of cement with the dirt on it, wipe it all away, wipe away all the dirt, and he was left with these fascinating structures. So these are the nests that are under the ground. Some of them are very, very long. Some of them have lots of chambers, lots of activities going on in all these areas. And so it just gives us an idea of how complex they are under the ground that we can't even see. I wanted to share this with you because as I was investigating this a little more, it seems that some people, being people, they've decided to capitalize on the beauty of science and turn it into art. And so somebody discovered that they could put liquid zinc or aluminium down to these ant holes, and they would, I lost my mouse, here we go. They could take out the clump that once it had hardened, they could wash away all of the dirt and the soil, and they come up with these beautiful structures that were underneath the soil. And I'm a fan of some funky art myself, and so this appealed to me, so I just wanted to share it with you. But interestingly, there was a lot of chatter online that talked about how this really wasn't very environmentally friendly, and particularly from the standpoint of being an ant, because the ants are in these nests as this is happening, and they're literally being vaporized by this hot metal being poured down into their nests. So there was many people online that were saying that they didn't approve of this, and it wasn't an activity that they supported. Anyway, so let's start talking about ant history. So this is quite key. So the ant, bee, wasps, remember they're all related, those ancestors were thought to have evolved between 110 and 130 million years ago. And the ant group was originally thought to have evolved from ground foraging wasps that then went underground. And this is based on specimens that they found in fossil amber. So I just put a picture here of what a modern day foraging wasp looks like. It does fly, it flies from place to place, but it does spend time on the ground looking for prey. But it turned out that there's some other research that suggested that ants may have actually started off as an underground creature, and that they evolved alongside the evolution of flowering plants, which happened about 125 million years ago. And this makes sense because if you have the choice of having to go out and find another bug who's going to argue with you and fight back if you're trying to take it for prey, whereas collecting pollen and nectar from a flower that's not going to argue with you, that's a more efficient use of your energy to go and collect the pollen and the nectar from flowering plants. And so that may be the reason why they came up out of the ground and evolved alongside these flowering plants. And in any case, they diversified and gained ecological dominance 60 million years ago. And I point this out because if you think that ants bother you now, they have been bothering things for the last 60 million years. So as humans, I think the sooner we can understand and respect this, the more we can understand that really we'll never eliminate ants. We're never really going to remove them from our existence. We just have to learn to live with them. So I just want to put this into a little bit of context. This is sort of a stylized timeline. Now, if you look over here, it might not be so clear on your screen, but over here, there's some cave type people here. This is 1.6 million years ago. Our human ancestors were about 2 million years ago in here. And then we go back in time, and I don't know if you can read these numbers. I'm at 35 million years, 65 million years, and I go all the way over to here, and this little thing on the ground here, which isn't very clear, is actually the flowering plants. So they're suggesting that these were evolving around this time. So, and the ants have been evolving with these flowering plants since this period. So they've been here all of this millions and millions and millions of years ago. And humans, by contrast, are Johnny-come-latelys. We just got here. And so we really have to take into consideration that the ants have definitely got the advantage over us, and we'll need to learn to live with them. So going back in time, obviously the ant fossils are what the scientists can use to try and figure out what has been going on, how they've diversified, how they've changed. And they look into amber, and amber is the resin, as you probably know, from trees that does harden. And anything that it rolls over, it collects bugs and seeds and things that are going around at that time, and it hardens and it forms these fossils with the ants inside. And this one here in the middle is a very important species because it is thought to be the link between the ants and the wasps, and it is thought to retain some of the features of both the ants and the wasps as those two groups were separating out. And this species here is 92 million years old. Also, the scientists found that in some of the rocks, you have these mineralized nests, and you may recognize these from the ant nests that we saw a couple of slides ago. And it's obviously little chambers and things going on and some very interesting features. And these are from 100 million years ago. Naturally, there's no ants left in there, so scientists can't say what species of ant formed it, but it is does give an indication of what the ant nests were looking like 100 million years ago. Also wanted to draw your attention to this little picture I've put on the left-hand side. This is considered a living fossil, and I paralleled it with what we have. It's referred to as the insect coelacanth. The coelacanth is a fish, and I'll explain why I've mentioned that. But this little ant over here lives in the rainforest, and some scientists were looking for ant species, and then they came across two of these. And they collected them up. They thought they were very special and they're very unusual, and that they had retained some of the very primitive ant characteristics. They're blind, they're very small, they live underground. So they sent them away for sampling. And unfortunately, those two, this happened in about 2000, and those two ants actually got destroyed on the route to the lab to be tested, and there was nothing that could be done with them. So the scientists kept looking, couldn't find any more. 2003, they found one more. And so this is the one here, and it's the side view and the top view. And what they did was they took off one of the legs for DNA testing. And I don't know what happened to the other two, but they definitely tested one leg, and they confirmed that it does have these very primitive ant characteristics. It is this very special sister line of ants. So it's not related to our ants, but not directly related to our ants, but it's a sideline, a cousin, if you will, of our existing ants. They have very soft mandibles. These are the mouth parts here. And as I said, they're blind, live under the ground. So I wanted to talk about its name. Its name was Martialis hurica, and hurica was because the scientist who found it finally was relieved that they had found one, and they were saying, oh my gosh, thank heavens I found one, so eureka. And then when it was shown to the eminent ant scientist E.O. Wilson, he said, well, gosh, it looks like it's from Mars. And so its name is Martialis eureka. And it's referred to as the insect coelacanth, and I digress slightly into the fish world. This is a coelacanth, and it also was expected and believed to be extinct. And then I think it was in the 1940s or 50s, something like that. They actually found them alive and well. And it also is considered to have some of the features, retain some of the features of the more primitive fish. And so these two are considered very sort of similar because they are living fossils. So in the case of ant evolution, we've seen lots of different changes over the millions and millions of years. And this one was quite an unusual one that I wanted to point out. So these are actual fossils in the amber, and mandibles are the mouth parts of ants, and they have diversified quite a bit over the year on this picture on the right-hand side. The red is the different types of mandibles that you might see. Now, this is an interesting one with these very sharp sort of impaling mandibles. And so the scientists looked at this. They did a little cartoon drawing here so you can see what's going on. It actually has a horn coming out of its head. Here's the one in the fossil just here. And there's no similar characteristic in our modern day ants. And so they weren't 100% sure what was going on. But it's believed that these large lower mandibles would actually impale the prey onto the horn, and then the ant was able to suck the juices out of the prey. And so here a scientist has put a big one together for you with these large mandibles. And one of the interesting things about these mandibles is most ant mandibles, if you've ever watched any of the close-ups on the David Attenborough or the National Geographic, the ant mouth parts move sideways, from side to side, closing like this. Our jaws, by contrast, move up and down. And these ants also had jaws that moved up and down. The mandibles moved up and down. And so scientists were saying that, they think that these jaws were moving up and down, impaling these prey, but they weren't 100% sure. And then they found a fossil in the amber that had exactly what was going on. So here we have the actual fossil in the amber. This is 99 million years old. They've done a little sketch here so that you can see a little bit more clearly what's going on. There's the little horn. This little creature is captured, and they know that underneath are those sharp impaling type mandibles, and this is exactly what they thought was going on. And so the little creature is just thought to be an extinct cockroach relative. So I just wanted to throw this in there because technology, as you know, is advancing every year. And so nowadays what they can do with some of these fossils that are in the amber, they can actually x-ray them from various different angles and then use these 3D printers to generate a proper model of the ants that are in the amber. So you can actually see it in front of you instead of looking two-dimensionally at a picture on a screen. So it's really fascinating what they can do with technology these days. Okay, so we keep on with ant diversity. I'm going to talk about the size. So the largest fossil is Titanomyrma giganteum, where the queen was 6 centimeters and the wing, that's the body length, and the wingspan is 15 centimeters. So that's over here on the right-hand side, and here's a little hummingbird specimen placed next to it for contrast. And I'm not, quite up on how big my hummingbirds are. And so this is my hand, and I took out my ruler, and this is 15 centimeters from one end to the other. And so just to put that in context with my own hand and a pencil, you can see that that's quite a hefty wingspan. If you look at your own hand and you imagine the wings, that's a large ant. Now, the largest living ants we have, because of course those very large ones are extinct, those largest ones we have are the giant Amazonian ants, and those are these in the picture here. And again, if you sort of look at your own hand and you visualize the size of those ants, those are quite hefty ants. I imagine they have quite a hefty, strong bite as well. They're about 3 centimeters long. The smallest ant is this little one in the corner here, and she's about 1 millimeter, and she is from the Fiji Islands. And so I just wanted to show you some of the diversity in size. There is also a lot of diversity with color. We typically think that ants are maybe brown, dark brown, black, that sort of thing, but actually many of them have some iridescent hairs which convey these beautiful colors. Some of them are pale yellow, and some are green. They are quite interesting and nifty, not just brown and black like we imagine. Now, so one of their big successes is due to dealing with adverse conditions in their environment. And so here's a couple of interesting ones that I wanted to show you. But we need to take into consideration that ants live on every landmass and in every climate except the very coldest areas of the Arctic. And this is probably because they're cold-blooded, and so they need the warmth to perform all their activities. And so when it's too cold, they just can't function very well. But they can cope in waterlogged and tidal areas. So here we have on the left-hand side some fire ants, and typically if an area floods, they will come up out of the ground all together as a group, and they will hold on to one another, holding on to each other's bodies and arms very tightly, legs, and form sort of a raft, and they're able to float, and they'll float along until they find something solid, a tree or the ground, and then they will go ahead and spread out and settle on that new dry area. But it's an interesting feature that they are able to survive and not be drowned by an increase in the tide or a heavy rain. So in a different way, we have honeypot ants. And so in some climates and areas that may have periods of plentiful food and not so plentiful food, they have become adapted to become storage vessels. And these, we call them repletes. They live inside the nest, and they will, the workers will go out, the foragers will go out and bring back food, and they will share it with these repletes, and they basically don't ever leave the nest, and they fill up in their abdomens. And in times of dearth, they are able to be massaged, and then they will regurgitate some food, and then it will be able to be shared with the nest as a method of survival. So interestingly, if you keep going on the internet and you look around, you'll see that their ants have all sorts of fascinating ways of responding to environmental conditions. And some of them I thought was interesting. They respond to flooding within their nests by actually drinking the water that comes into their nest and then traveling outside and excreting it outside. It's very fascinating. Whilst I was doing some of my research for this talk originally, I found the most fascinating video, and my poor family had to listen to this and watch this video. It was talking about the ants in tidal areas and when they would flood and the nests would get all flooded out, and then the ants had to deal with this. And this very special video, if you are so inclined and you have 10 minutes, it's not even 10 minutes, it's about 3 minutes. If you go onto BBC and put in David Attenborough and swimming ant, you will find this video, and it is the most fascinating thing. So there's an ant coming along, and he's approaching a pool of water, a large body of water, and he has to get to the other side, and he simply walks into the water and starts to paddle, and he paddles and paddles, and he just is in this freestyle that is so natural and so efficient, and he makes it over to the other side like it was all natural. It's something I've never seen before. It was fascinating. And he just gets up out of the water and goes about his business, and it was crazy. I've never seen anything like it. He wasn't floundering, he wasn't sinking, he was just doing a very organized paddle, and it was shocking. So if you want to amuse yourself for 3 minutes, you can just Google swimming ants, BBC, and David Attenborough, and I guarantee you'll find him. Now, another little ant that I became quite fond of when I was doing my research is this Sahara Silver Ant, and it's living in the most aggressive and difficult conditions in the Sahara Desert, where the temperatures can reach up to 158 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, it'll feed on corpses of other insects and other arthropods, and it actually can go out in the middle of the day when the other creatures are normally all hiding, all the living creatures are hiding, but anybody who's dead will still be on the top. And so they can go and forage for those other creatures. And they themselves still must keep their body temperature below 128 degrees Fahrenheit for most of the time. And the way they do that is by having these very interesting silver hairs on their body, and they are for reflecting the light. So if you look at this electron micrograph picture down here, you can see all these tiny little hairs, and you can, if you look in here, you can see he's kind of got this silver sheen, or she's got this silver sheen. And so what they saw, the scientists saw, was that all the little hairs on the body are actually shaped like little triangles. So here they are all lined up, and here they are all next to each other. And if you recall anything about your physics class from high school, you'll remember that little glass prism that they would shoot the beam of light into, and it was completely reflected out of the other side. And they think that is exactly what's happening with these hairs. And so here's a cross section of the hair, and the light will be coming down, hitting it, and completely reflecting. And that way, the ant does not absorb the heat, as much heat from the sun. And so that is a mechanism that they've evolved to deal with these high temperatures. Now, scientists being scientists, they've carried out some experiments to see if this was the case. And they shaved the hairs off of some of these little tiny ants, and they did an experiment to see which ones what their body temperature was at certain times. And so this is what we're seeing here in this little experiment down here. The red line is at increasing temperature and increasing time. These ants had little or no hairs, and their body temperature is hotter. And the green line down here are the ants that still retained their hairs, and they were able to actually reduce their body temperature by several degrees. So I thought that was quite interesting. Oh, actually, let me go back. Oh, gosh. Let me see if I can figure out how to go back. Well, you know what? I don't want to mess up my presentation slide and pull you out. But there was one little piece in there that I wanted to talk about, the Sahara ant, before I moved on to this slide. And it was to do with the fact that the Sahara ants have little eye spots on the top of their head, and they're actually sort of right up here on top of this picture here. You can't see it very well. They're actually right in here. And that Sahara ant had one other fascinating feature about it. So the scientists would watch these ants as they go out into the desert, and they would make this zigzag pattern across the desert, looking for prey, going this way, then going that way. And they would stop every now and then, and they would orient themselves, look around. And the scientists worked out that what they were actually doing is orienting themselves probably to the sun. And what they would do is when they got to their prey and they found it, they would then take the shortest path back to the nest. So no matter how zigzaggy their path was getting there, they were actually able to find their way back more efficiently. And that was also another feature of these ants. So they were really quite interesting. So let's move on to ant communication. We're about halfway through. It's very essential in these large colonies to make sure all the jobs get done. And they use 4 different types of communication. There's chemoreception, these are the pheromones or the scents released by glands and picked up by the antennae. They also use touch and body language, so they can touch with their feet or their antennae. They use trophallaxis, which is the transfer of liquids, usually from the mouth. And then stridulation. And this is a vibration by rubbing a couple of the body parts together, and it makes this vibration, which is actually a sound, and it happens right down here between the legs and the abdomen on the ants. And I actually found this for you, and I wanted to play this for you, and I'm hoping this will pick up on the on your speakers. I'm gonna play you one more. I won't bore you with any more, but that was fascinating, mind-blowing for me, because I had no idea that ants made any sounds like that. So this is a demonstration of, when you start looking into these things, into these fascinating worlds of insects or animals or plants or whatever it is, you just keep finding more and more and more things to learn about. And it is really absolutely fascinating. So although I've been doing this entomology for, I don't know, for 30 years, I guess, you're learning all the time. There's fascinating things to learn about. Anyway, so going back to communication, there's so many messages that the ants send. They send messages about danger, I've located food, there's a mating or sexual communication or instructions for mating, come quickly and attack, follow me, calm down, I am one of yours, to make more eggs, to make males, make queens, to dig more rooms, communication for feed me, clean me, this is the edge of my colony, you're an intruder and you are dead. And those are all sorts of messages that can be sent. So the antenna are one of the areas where most of the communications are received. And if you look here on the micrograph picture here, you can see this little hole, a little pore in an enlarged section of the antenna, and the pheromones will go in through these pores. They will generate an electrical stimulus in the brain, which then gets transferred down so the ant can understand what the message is. And these little hair-like structures are also considered to be involved in communication and maybe picking up vibrations as well. So the scouts that are searching for food, they lay pheromone scent trails for the other workers to follow, a bit like breadcrumbs. Now, when they were looking at antennas, they realized that male antennas were not able to recognize as many pheromones as females. And this makes a lot of sense because if you recall, the males are only there for a short period of time. Their only job is to mate. And the females are doing all the other jobs. And so they have many more messages to communicate with each other. And so that makes a lot of sense. Interestingly, I found online that there was a chemical that the researchers identified, which was within that scent trail that was laid down. And it's also being simultaneously looked at as a possible Alzheimer's treatment. So it's obviously something to do with memory, and it's being shown to possibly be helpful with memory loss reductions in humans, but they are finding it in a few of the other simple creatures, and we call them simple, but to be obvious, obviously they're not simple, such as ants and jellyfish, and I think there was some squid that also had this similar chemical. So it's obviously something to do with memory. So the scientists are trying to work out why it's important to them as well. Now the ants obviously can smell food, and if I ever have lunch in my my office, which I hardly ever have food in my office, but if I do leave my lunch there for 5 minutes, well, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, the ants will come along. And I don't have ants normally existing in my office as a regular, but they can certainly smell the food, and wherever they're hiding, they'll come on out and locate my leftover lunch. So all of these messages are very important, and that is why, one of the reasons why they have led to this massive success with the colony and how it works as a superorganism. Now, as it is a superorganism, and there are so many ants and workers all working together, they need an extraordinarily good level of hygiene because they're so closely related. They are at high risk of a pathogen coming in and taking them all out, killing them all off. And so that could cause the collapse of the entire colony. And so scientists realized that, well, they did know that the ants protect themselves by producing a poison from their abdominal glands, and it's formic acid, and it is caustic. And in this picture here, I don't know how good your screen is, but on mine, there's a little, what looks like a little spray coming out of the end of the abdomen. And I don't think this is photoshopped on here, but nevertheless, it gives the picture of what's happening. And this ancestral function, and some modern day ants still do use it against predators, but researchers found that it also had a very interesting antimicrobial property. And so it's not used, some ants are not just using it for defense to spray on intruders, but they're also using it for cleaning. And so they also found that this poison was used to sterilize nesting areas prior to use. And if you want to consider, that's like us moving into a new apartment or a new house, and we feel like we need to clean and have a wipe down of all the surfaces and sort of remove the sense of whoever was there before. And so ants are doing something very similar with this antimicrobial poison. And they also use it to clean any of their nest mates when they come in from outside, just in case they've been infected with pathogens. And they also use it as part of their brood care. So the brood is the young, immature ants that are in the nest, and they do this acidopore grooming. And so acidopore is the opening into the hindgut, which contains the poison glands. And they will lick out this poison into their own mouths, the worker ants. Then they will groom the pupae and spread the antimicrobial poison over their brood whilst they're grooming off any little spores or anything, or any dirt or anything that's on their developing brood. And so the spores that they collect in their mouths, they spit out, but they've also been disinfected because, of course, they've taken the poison out of their own abdomen, put it in their mouth, so they're disinfecting their own mouths, and then any spores that they collect from either the workers that have been contaminated coming in or the brood, they are disinfected and disinfecting the spores within their own mouth so that those spores do not germinate once they spit them out and put them on the side. But the scientists discovered that they wanted to test how effective this grooming and antimicrobial treatment was. And so they got some super glue and they blocked the mouths of some of the ants and the acidopores of some of the other ants, and some they blocked both the mouth and the acidopore. And those that couldn't groom with their mouth parts or put the poison on, those brood did not do very well. Those ants that could actively groom with their mouth parts, removing any spores, and put on the antimicrobial treatment did significantly better. And those in between that had either their mouths glued shut or the abdomens that are glued shut, though that brood didn't do quite as well. So they were trying to demonstrate that it requires both the grooming and the cleaning and also the antimicrobial treatment. So again, these ants have layers upon layers of all sorts of success mechanisms. Now, one of the pathogens they have to be very careful of is this interesting one here, which leads to these things called zombie ants. So this is all for real. And what this is a fungal pathogen, and it can drop onto an ant and then penetrate into that ant's body, and it will start to affect the behavior of the ant. And the ant will travel, excuse me, up one of the nearest trees, leaves, that sort of thing, go right to the top, and it will bite down with its mouth parts and die. And then from out of the ant, you will get these long hyphae with these little capsules. And in each of these capsules are more spores that will then drop down onto the ant below. And so you have this cyclical nature of a fungal pathogen that is modifying the ant's behavior and causing it to do something that the pathogen wants it to do. I've added this little cartoon in here so you can see exactly what's going on. This is a regular ant. He's getting coated with these little fungal spores. He's starting to go crazy, doing some different behaviors, going upside down on the leaf, and something grows out of his head. And here we are again. So that was really fascinating. I wanted to share that with you. So we're still talking about hygiene a little bit. They have a very, very clean house because, of course, there's so many of them all living together. So they have very distinct piles for both refuse and dead ants and feces. And typically the dead ants and any refuse is taken outside of the ant nest. And that could be because although their ants are recyclers, they don't want to recycle their own dead bodies because there is a risk that if an ant has died, it may have died of some sort of a pathogen or a bacterial problem. So there's a risk with eating your own dead, so they don't. They will dump them outside. And they do have a separate toilet area that they use inside. And there was an interesting experiment that I saw the other day, and it had nests of ants, and they put them in these white kind of cement little colony spaces. And then they fed them dyed food, like with red dye and blue dye. And so they looked inside, and they could see that the ants were only putting their feces in one or two spots, and that was it. So all of the ants knew where that area was. And presumably, even though the ants have had that antimicrobial treatment, that's why they can afford to have their feces inside the nest and not outside. But it was very fascinating to show that they didn't just randomly, sort of poop and go. They actually knew where to go, and they focused those areas as being the toilet areas. So then when they looked at the dead ants, some scientists found that some ants produce this oleic acid when they die. In other species, there's just fading pheromones that trigger the same bring out your dead response. And so the ants seem to recognize something about this, these scents of the dead ants, and they would recognize to take them outside and take them to the cemetery. And so my daughter actually was on the internet doing something completely different and showed me this experiment that she had seen a gentleman doing, where he had an ant nest. It was very similar to this. You can buy these with the gel. And he had a colony of ants in here. And so he put some oleic acid on one of the female workers, and he was expecting the other ants to come and take her physically and deposit her in the cemetery area. But actually, he was interested to see that she took herself to the cemetery area. She must have recognized the scent, not really realizing that it was her, but she traveled to the cemetery area, and it was interesting to watch. You can probably find it online if you look it up. And she sat there for a while and didn't really do anything. And obviously, I think she was probably expecting to die. It didn't happen. And so after a while, the scents faded away, and she traveled back to the nest and returned to her duties. And it was all just very fascinating. But obviously, they're showing that these pheromones and scents obviously have quite an important role in all the duties of the nest. So I'm going to move along really quickly here because we're running out of time. So ants, they're very generalist predators. They'll eat small bugs, insects, eggs, and things like that. And these are actually some ants that are feeding on some aphids, and they're feeding on the honeydew that the aphids are extracting from the plant. And so you'll often find ants in association with the aphids. But there's some other ants that are very interesting. and they raise these fungal farms on leaves. And you may have seen those classic pictures of the ants walking along with the pieces of the leaf. And so basically what they're doing is they take those leaves back into the nest, they cover them with fungus, and they feed on the fungus themselves. But what's really important and interesting is that the ants were also determined to have bacteria on the outside of their bodies, and the bacteria is used to protect the ant, and then also to protect the leaf from bacterial infections. So what's key here, there's a lot of words on this one, but it was basically that the bacteria that are naturally occurring on the ant are producing multiple antibiotics, and scientists are looking at these antibiotics as possibly being the source of new antibiotics for people, because of course, you know, we've got antibiotic resistance that's coming up as a big problem. We're running out of different types of antibiotics. We need new strains. And so they're actually looking at ants, and they're also looking at the fact that there's multiple strains of antibiotics on the ants, and that strategy of multiple antibiotics may be what's helping these ants deal with all of the bacteria that they have to live with all the time under the soil. And those strategies of multiple antibiotics and also the new strains is maybe something that humans can look at to be useful to us. And then just quickly, that the new queen takes a sample of this leaf fungus with her when she starts a new nest and starts all over again. Okay, so we're going to quickly change gears. We're going to talk about ants in Bermuda. There's been a number of studies, reports of ants since 1619. There was the cockroach and ant, and they were attacking the figs, they were attacking the people, they came in plagues, and they were talking about how they put wax and oil on the legs of the food holders and tables and things to try and keep the ants away. A very special scientist kindly came to Bermuda a number of years ago and surveyed our ants. And we've got about 20 different species, and you may have seen some of his lectures before, Dr. Wetterer. But these are some of the common ones that we have in Bermuda. So the Argentine ant is one of the worst invasive ants that we have. It's the world's worst invasive ants, on the top 100, I believe. And it is in almost every country. And in Bermuda, it's everywhere, but I believe it's not found on none such, interestingly. And it can form super colonies with billions and billions and billions of workers. And interestingly, the largest one they found, there was, I think, one big one in Japan and one big one in California. And the biggest one they found was in the Mediterranean. And it was 6,000 kilometers long. And it's considered the largest animal society other than humans. This is a big-headed ant. It's the one that eats my lunch in my office. And it was the dominant ant in Bermuda until the arrival of the Argentine ant. And here we have a couple of workers. These are both workers, but one is a soldier worker with a very large enlarged head, obviously for attacking and defending the nest, and then a smaller worker over here. And these days you can't find that many of them, but there are a few pockets of ants, big-headed ants here and there. And while we're on the topic of strange-headed ants, I just wanted to throw this in. This is not an ant for Bermuda, but I just wanted to point this out because it's so fascinating. These ants' heads are exactly the same shape as the holes that you can find in wood that have been caused by beetles. And these ants know to recognize the exact size of the hole that suits their head, and they can plug that hole with their head and then protect all of the rest of the colony. And here we have the ant head stuck in there. So I just wanted to point that out to you because there's some very nifty heads in the ant world. So this is a little thief ant. It's a very common ant. Very, very tiny, almost invisible, lives in my kitchen all the time, coexists with the Argentine ants that also live in my kitchen. And they don't really cause much of a problem. They nest in rotting wood, and they kind of scavenge from other ants, but they also do scavenge on the countertop. But interestingly, they have found, it was a little unexpected, but they were found to have the most powerful antibiotics of all the ants tested. And remember, I mentioned a minute ago that they were antibiotics on the ants. And so they washed some of these ants and tested the antimicrobial agents on a bacterial slurry, and they found that these ants actually had the strongest antibiotics, which is unexpected. This is a very unusual ant. Many of the Bermuda naturalists will know this one, Trapjawed ant. It was considered to be extinct, but it had been very dominant in the late 1800s. But by the 1930s, it was rare and considered to go extinct for, within the next 10 years, and it was thought to be extinct. It was found in the 1960s again, and then in the 1980s. And since I've been doing this job for 20-something years, I've actually had several of them brought into me. So I do know that there are pockets of them that have obviously found a little safe niche, and they are just living their quiet little existence. What makes them very interesting is their jaws. And they have unusually large trap jaws. And at the end of the jaws, I don't think you can see on your screen, but this actually you can see on mine, there's very little, tiny little hairs. And those are the hairs that are triggers. And so if something comes into their jaws, it will immediately snap shut. And those jaws are considered the fastest body part of the animal kingdom. and they're recorded between 78 and 143 miles per hour. And they can also be used to trap the prey, but interestingly, if they face their head to the ground when they are in danger and they snap their jaws shut, it flings them out of danger and is also considered to be a survival mechanism. So ant control, just very quickly in sort of the last 5 minutes, I think we all recognize now that the ants are amazing survivalists. They have adapted, they have coexisted, they have evolved, they have modified. So really we need to understand, are we trying to control them, or are they really actually probably controlling us? So control and elimination is impossible. All you can do is keep them at bay. And so you just have to look at exactly what they're needing. They need a nesting location, they need food, and they need moisture. And so in order to keep the ants out of your house, or whichever area you feel you need to be ant-free from, you can make your location as inhospitable as possible. So no food, no moisture, cleaned and disturbed. And by disturbed, I mean wipe under things so that you don't have little dead spiders or dead moths, anything that would be of interest to them. Keep the surfaces very clean. These are all very straightforward. I'm just going to run through them really quickly as control mechanisms. Clean up leftover food and drinks immediately. Keep foods in tightly sealed containers. Now, interestingly, jars don't work because the ants can work their way up that spiral, the spiral top of the jars, and so you need a rubber seal on the top if you really want to have an effective jar. Keep the especially interesting items such as honey, sugar, and peanut butter in the fridge. Wipe up your crumbs and any drips scrupulously. Wipe up any ant trails with soapy water, dilute vinegar, or a cleaning agent. Vacuum your kitchen floor if you can to get any extra little crumbs or bits of food. Remove your garbage and your recycling bags quickly and take them away from the house. And keep any trees and bushes kind of cut back and away from the house so the ants don't have an easy path into your house. And remove any old vegetation or wood or anywhere where they would think it was a good idea to make a home near the house. So you're trying to just keep them away from the house. Ensure that all your windows and doors, especially in the kitchen, seal really tightly, and then seal any cracks and crevices if you can with caulk or silicone. And just remember, if there's no food, no moisture, and everything is nice and clean, they shouldn't be as interested in your area. Now, if you go online and you look up ant, solutions and ant control, you'll see these horrific images that suggest that people can spray pesticides in what appears to be a kitchen. I don't recommend that at all. I think it's too close to your food, too close to you. And so just be very careful. I don't recommend them inside the house unless it's sort of under the counters, away from all your food, away from your pets, that sort of thing. And the pesticide sprays can leave a residue, which is fantastic for killing the next ant that comes along, but obviously it's going to leave a residue that you might be exposed to as well. So in a way, bait products are better because they are often in a little enclosure, a little box or something, and so the ants then will not die when they pick up the bait, but they take it back and share it with the nest, and the numbers tend to decrease. But just be careful, because when you do attract the ants, you attract loads of the ants with the baits, and then after a couple of days you'll find that the ants start to subside as they've taken it back and they're not feeling so well. So I'm not recommending any product. I simply have these up here just as a reference, but you can buy a number of bait products from the grocery stores, but you can certainly go online and find recipes that are non-toxic, are attractive to ants, and you can try them for yourself. You can mix borax with sweet substance or peanut butter and put it in like a baby jar with some holes in it, keep it away from animals and children. But it is considered much safer. But there's a number of home remedies that include garlic and pepper and mint and lemon juice and things like that, which feel free to test them out and see them. Sometimes I have lots of baby powder in all sorts of different locations in my house that I find it deters the ants. Some people say toothpaste works pretty nicely, but you can test them out for yourself. And that's it. We've got to the end. Thank you so much. I think we have a few minutes to spare, so I'm happy to take any questions, but I'm not an ant specialist, so if you go too deep, I might not have the answers for you, but you know what, the internet can certainly help you find all the answers and much more that you never expected about ants. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire. That was, as Trey Whaley said, very informative, and we can tell your passion about the topic for sure. So yeah, one of my questions is, it comes and goes in my house. So I have little small kids. There's always crumbs, but sometimes you don't see them, and then other times they just take over, and it seems seasonal, but I can't figure out what the season is.
It does, and then sometimes you may recall after we've had a hurricane and a storm, we're just inundated with all these ants, and if you sort of think of it logically, I think what happens is the ants, their environment gets salty and wet, and so they're looking to set up house in a drier, less salty environment. And so that's sometimes why they make their way into our houses and into our spaces, and we feel like maybe the hurricane brought them, but it didn't. It's just disturbed them somehow, and they've moved around. And certainly they can be seasonal. I mean, the colder weather, they're less active, but obviously they're still very active, but less. And yeah, it's certainly the summertime seems to be more ants, and it's, you know, they're just a bit more active, more scavenging around. There's more other insects out and things prey for them. So yeah, it does sort of come and go, but they're always there.
Yeah, they're always there. Jennifer had a great question. I'm going to steal it. So I have the same problem. There's certain sockets that they just love, and they come out of these sockets continuously. Why? What is the attraction to electrical sockets?
I don't know. I have to say I've seen it as well. I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'll leave here and go and Google it. I don't know why they are so interested in the electrical sockets. I mean, there is conduit, obviously, that goes up on the wall and goes somewhere, and so I don't know if they're using that as a mechanism to get from A to B, but it does seem that they are sort of interested in the sockets. I don't know if it's electrical circuits or the warmth, or maybe it's a smell. I'm not sure exactly what is attracting them into the sockets.
Okay, thanks.
But I'm going to work on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So one other question, I'm going to dominate the questions. I have lots of comments coming through, but no questions yet, so I'm going to take over. In Bermuda, what are the main threats to these ants? Because they're obviously, they have a role in our ecosystem, but what are the threats to them in Bermuda?
So in terms of our species of ants, probably, you know, the one we're least interested in is the Argentine ant, because it's very, very invasive and very capable of taking up residence in all our different environments. And I think probably in terms of threats to the ants, it's probably going to be, you know, I'll be honest, I think it's probably going to be pesticides and things like that, because they're so, I hesitate to say building or construction or anything like that, because they're so capable of taking the very smallest little spot and hole and little cavity and setting up shop there. And obviously we're always going to have the soil and the dirt and that sort of things for those that prefer to be right in the soil. And they're so capable of capitalizing on any opportunity to set up a nest somewhere that I'm struggling to think of what the threats would be other than sort of increased or over pesticide use, you know, people sort of indiscriminately putting down insecticide all around their house, that sort of thing. And there's so many of them that the predators are not, you know, are not really that much of a problem for them. I mean, certainly when you look at those ants that we now consider to be not dominant, say the Trapjawed ant, it has been, their biggest threat has been the other invasive ants, and that's pushed them into these little pockets. And so I suppose it could be the other ants are probably their biggest threat. But it's astonishing that with an ant as invasive and as prevalent as the Argentine ant, the Trapjawed ants and some of our other ants are still surviving in little pockets here and there, and they've obviously got enough survival mechanisms left that they can cope. So I guess you know what, I guess it's probably the invasive ants are their biggest threat, are you know, the ones that we sort of refer to a bit more fondly, like the big-headed ant and the Trapjawed ant. But interestingly, the big-headed ant would have been the one in the 1800s that was causing everybody all those hair-pulling events and trying to, you know, deal with all the ants. But so obviously that was considered a massive pest at that time. Now we sort of go, oh gosh, poor ant, you know, it's being out competed by this other ant. So it's all a matter of perspective. But yeah, I think the other ants would probably be the biggest threat.
And was the Argentina ant introduced accidentally, or was it a biological control?
Yeah, no. It would have been an accidental introduction. And I mean, many years ago, we introduced, we were importing plants and shrubbery and instant things. I mean, back, you know, sort of in the 1800s and, you know, early 1900s, we just imported plants with soil and potting mix and stuff. And people traveled on the boats, you know, going to America and that sort of thing with plants. And so they probably came with the soil and the whatever the plant had with it, and then it was just plunked in the ground and off they go. But it was definitely an accidental introduction.
Here's a question for you. Is citronella spray safer?
So yes, technically, yes. All of those sort of botanical sprays tend to be safer. And for any insect problem, there are so many products now that are on the shelf, readily available to deal with whatever your insect problems are, that are much safer for you, safer for your children, safer for your pets. And so yes, typically citronella, it's derived from a plant, is safer. And I find that there's varying degrees of effectiveness, and it's all about sort of finding the right product that works for you. There's no like silver bullet that, I say, oh, go buy this product and it'll, you'll never see another ant in your house, or you'll never see another cockroach in your house. It doesn't quite work like that. You kind of have to do your own efforts at reducing the number of, or the availability of them coming in. So making sure your windows are sealed, your doors are closed, at nighttime. Want to keep the cockroaches out, keep your doors and windows closed, don't have no screens, that sort of thing. But then also, if you find you do have a problem, then choose the pesticides that are the safest, the botanical ones, the least toxic ones. There's so many products now that are out there that you just, you just have to test them out and see what works for you.
Here's another great question that came in. Are there any ants endemic to Bermuda?
I don't think so. I don't think so, because even the Trapjawed ant, although it's very special to us, it is found in other areas of the world, and I don't believe the one that we have is endemic. So I think the answer is no.
Okay. Okay. Are there any last thoughts on these fantastic creatures before we wrap up for today?
Can you hear me?
I can. Yes.
Yeah, we can. Okay. I had a couple of questions. You said the queen ants are fed the extra protein to make them queens. How do they make the soldier ants?
Oh, you mean within the big-headed ants? How they make the soldiers?
Well, yeah.
I don't know. I imagine that could also be diet as well, because obviously it's a bigger structure. Yeah. And so that may well be another component of a special diet, so that those ones do develop differently, because that would make sense. It may be that it may be a combination of a chemical and a diet, perhaps, that's going to make an ant that's a different structure. But it's also got to be in their DNA, because that species of ant does that. So and other species of ant don't have that big-headed feature. And so it's not that you can just adjust the diet of other ants and they'll do that. It is that ant. So it must be something inherent to that species of ant, that they have the capability of making two different types of workers. And I would say that, sort of extrapolating on the little information that I do know, it could be something to do with their diet.
Right. I'll let you do the other question that's come up.
Yeah, and I love this name too, Nutty Otter. You said that ants can smell. So how strong is their sense of smell, and is there a particular odor these ants favor the most?
Oh, and you're getting into the territory of ant specialists now, and so I don't know. I would say that their sense of smell is probably pretty good. If I have my only experiment is in my own office. So my office is maybe, I don't know, maybe 6 by 8, something like that. Not very big, but it's a lot of paperwork, very little to nothing in there that would be of interest to them ant-wise. But I'm not joking. I can rest something on the counter. I don't have a single ant in there on a regular day. I never see ants, never. I don't see them behind my paperwork. I don't see them across my desk, never see them on the floor, never. But I can leave my lunch there for 15 minutes and they found it. So I really do think they are, I know they're up in the ceiling because I have seen them going up once, but somehow they are locating my lunch. So I think their sense of smell has got to be, within my room, probably 6 or 8 feet worth of detecting my lunch. Now I don't suggest that I call them out of other offices into my room. So I think they're very sort of close to me somehow, but I would say it's probably pretty good, but I don't know in terms of, a number of feet, how far away they can smell it, but I guarantee you somebody has done it. And if you Google it, I guarantee you're going to find the answer. And the more, even when I was revising for this second lecture on the ants, I looked up more stuff and I was finding more and so many different layers and the antibiotics and oh my gosh, it's going on. I mean, they were talking about how the antibiotics that we use today come from one line, Streptomyces, which they got from the soil of Easter Island.
Oh, wow.
I mean, the stuff there's so much fascinating stuff. So I don't know. And I can't pretend that I know all the answers about the ants, but the information is out there. So we'll have to look it up.
Yeah, I do know they really love scrambled eggs because there could be all kinds of stuff on my floor from little boys that, you know, leave crumbs, and they don't go for that, but they always go for the scrambled eggs.
Right. I did see a comment on the side,
Oh,
somebody
sorry.
saying, does the ant bite and also deliver formic acid? And I think maybe that suggestion is, does the bite give the formic acid? And it's not. The bite is a compression bite only with a few little jagged jaws there. It's pretty intense. And you can feel how sharp that is when they bite you. So for something so small, that's pretty intense. But no, the formic acid is produced by the poison glands in the end of the abdomen. So that would be sprayed on you. So it's not formic acid that you're getting in the bite. That's purely the bite.
Okay, great. Do you have any other questions, Jennifer?
That was my last one, because I mean some ant bites really feel like they're stinging.
And they do, and
yes.
you know, and it's worth looking into a little bit more, because I know that with the fire ants, they can leave a nasty sting. Now, with those tropical centipedes that you and I were talking about earlier on in before this chat, they do have glands in their mandibles that they can inject the poison through their mandibles, and modified mandibles. And it's possible that maybe the fire ants are doing this as well. I'm not sure. I haven't spent so much time with fire ants because fortunately we don't have fire ants here, but I know they can leave a nasty, nasty sting. So it's probably worth looking at that. Maybe some ants have different degrees of something that stings, a poison in their mandibles. Not 100% sure.
Right. Thank you. It's been absolutely mind-boggling, to be honest. All that information and all that, I think, very new information that you've found out. It was wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, new to me, and so I found it fascinating, and I'm happy to share it with you.
Yeah, and on behalf of Bermuda College and BESS, we want to thank you, Claire, for sharing all your fantastic information on ants. And obviously they're in control, we all know that. And I appreciate you giving back and just seeing the success that you've become in this area, and sharing that other Bermudians that you don't have to necessarily become an accountant or an insurer. You can become an insect specialist. Yeah, an entomologist. There you go. So we really appreciate your time and your knowledge and sharing all of that with us.
I was happy to do it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And for those that might want to watch again, it's going to be on YouTube forever. So you can catch Claire again if you want to watch it and get more details that you might have missed. And then hopefully you'll join us at our next Eco Lunch and Learn, which is November the 18th. Same time, 1 o'clock, and it'll probably be live streamed again on YouTube with COVID. And we'll be looking at the botanical gardens. The guest speaker will be Danny Simmons. So hopefully you'll join us again then. So thanks all, and thank you, Claire, for your time.
Thanks very much. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.